My half-brother fired me in front of the entire building on his first day as CEO. He didn't even look at me, just said, "Security will escort you out." They thought I'd walk away humiliated. What they didn't know was I still owned 77% of the company. The house he sleeps in, the car he brags about, all mine. But this didn't start with the firing. It started the day my father rewrote the will without telling me. They sold my future behind my back. So I slid a folder across the desk and told him, "Tell your father the board meeting in 1 hour. Will be interesting." You ever been erased by your own family? Let me show you what happens when the quiet son stops staying quiet. I pulled into the parking garage earlier than usual, thinking it would be a quiet Tuesday morning. The building felt familiar in that way a place does when you've spent half your life inside it, shaping it brick by brick. I'd gone over the numbers in my head on the drive in, planning how to present them at the board meeting later today. Nothing about the morning hinted that the ground was about to shift under me. But the moment I opened my office door, something was wrong. Dorian Maxton was sitting in my chair. Not in the way someone might sit for a second while waiting. No. He was leaned back like he owned the air in the room, his feet nearly touching the edge of my desk. My nameplate had been pushed aside, angled like an afterthought. He didn't bother turning toward me. He just said it as if reading a memo to an empty room. "You're fired. Security will escort you out." The words hit, but not like a punch. More like cold water poured over the back of my neck. I stood still long enough to make sure I'd heard him correctly. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge who he was speaking to. He flicked through emails on his phone with the kind of entitlement that makes people stupid. For a second, disbelief held me still. Then something inside me settled. Not anger, not panic. Something quieter, heavier. A kind of calm that feels like the start of a storm. Twist S1. His first act as CEO was firing me without a meeting, without a conversation, without even lifting his eyes. Public, intentional, humiliating. This kid, the same kid I used to defend when people whispered that he was a mistake my father had made, was now throwing me out of the company I had built from nothing. There was irony in that, the bitter kind. My fingers brushed the edge of my pocket, feeling the soft fabric of the hazelwood-colored handkerchief I always carried, the one my mother gave me before she passed. It wasn't anything remarkable to anyone else, but to me it grounded the moment, reminded me I'd survived deeper losses than a boy pretending to be a man in my chair. I didn't move. I didn't argue. I let him talk. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway, both of them looking uncomfortable, like they'd rather be anywhere else. One opened his mouth to say something polite, something that softened the blow, but Dorian cut him off. "We're changing the company image," he added, still scrolling as if I were a noise he wanted to mute. "Your era is over." Twist S2, not just firing me, erasing me. There's a sting that comes from knowing someone wants to rewrite history in front of your face. He didn't know the hours I'd slept in this building back when payroll barely covered our fuel costs. He didn't know the deals I'd traveled cross-country to secure when Dad was sick and the company was hanging by a thread. He knew nothing except whatever story he'd told himself about being owed something. I kept my voice steady. "I see." Instead of pleading or protesting, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the folder I'd brought with me. Not a thick one, just a single agreement inside. The one document that mattered. I placed it on the desk gently, like setting down a piece of glass. "Tell your father," I said, keeping my tone level. "The board meeting in 1 hour will be interesting." The room went still. Even the security guards froze, unsure if they'd stepped into something bigger than their pay grade prepared them for. Dorian finally looked up. A small smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, the kind people wear when they think they've already won. He assumed it was a bluff. He assumed everything I had was something my father had handed to me out of charity. He had no idea. He didn't know that 20 years ago, when the company was drowning, I signed a capital infusion agreement that gave me controlling interest. 77%. He didn't know that the mansion he bragged about hosting friends in was legally mine, bought under a trust he'd never bothered to understand. And he definitely didn't know that the BMW he'd posted online last week, calling it Dad's Gift, had been purchased entirely with my equity dividends. None of it was luck. None of it was given. And none of it belonged to him. But he didn't know. And I wasn't about to educate him here. I handed my ID badge to the closest guard. "Don't worry," I said quietly. "I'll walk." The hallway outside felt twice as long as usual. People watched from their offices, pretending not to. Some offered tight smiles, the kind that said they weren't sure if they should be afraid for me or afraid of the situation. I walked steadily, keeping my shoulders straight, even though a part of me felt scraped raw. It wasn't the firing. It was the disrespect. The way he dismissed me like I had been nothing more than an administrative note. That was harder to swallow. Still, beneath the sting, something solid was forming. Not revenge, not ego, just certainty. In the elevator, I let out one slow breath. The doors slid shut, muting the whispers behind me. He's about to learn who really owns this place, and the board will hear it straight from me. The elevator slid open onto the main lobby, and I stepped out into a silence that wasn't silent at all. People pretended to type or answer phones or walk quickly toward some imagined meeting, but their eyes followed me. The hallway whispers were a few seconds ahead of me now, winding through departments and cubicles like smoke. Dorian had wanted this. He'd planned for visibility. No quiet goodbye. No transition memo. No internal memo thanking me for my years of service. Just a firing and a hallway full of sidelong glances. I walked slowly, each footfall echoing louder in my head than on the marble floor. This lobby, this exact stretch of hallway, was where I stood 20 years ago when I signed the company's first freight contract. That morning, I didn't have a title or even an office. I was just a kid in rolled-up sleeves with a clipboard and a pitch. No one knew who I was yet. No one cared, except the client who took a chance on us. Now I passed that same spot on my way out. To my left, the company history wall showed framed photographs from the early days. Our founding team. There we were, my father, towering and proud. My two older brothers, one half distracted, the other too polished for the grit of logistics. And me, the youngest, standing a bit too straight, trying too hard not to look like I didn't belong. I did more than belong. I built the route system that tripled our service region. I negotiated partnerships when the others were too busy golfing or redecorating their offices. I carried the weight and I never asked for credit. Not then, but now. Being erased with one sentence, one cowardly non-confrontation, that stung. Halfway to the exit, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Packet delivered. All signatures verified. Melissa. I paused in place, letting the words register. Melissa had followed protocol. Just a few hours before Dorian's ambush, she'd sent my Section 14A packet to the board. Everything was filed, verified, and time-stamped. Legally binding. This wasn't a tantrum or a power grab. This was structure. process. I'd known this day might come, not exactly like this, but close enough. So I prepared. Dorian wanted to play a game. I'd written the rule book. Quiet justice. No fireworks, just the slow turn of a lock. At the far end of the lobby, the reception desk had changed since I last noticed it. Bigger screens now, streaming company updates and boardroom photos. And there it was, Dorian's new portrait. There's something insulting about a man posing for a picture in a suit you know he didn't pay for. He looked like he believed every word on whatever press release he'd approved. Fresh leadership. New vision. He'd barely lasted a year at a community college, floated from job to job until Dad created a cushy title for him just to keep him off the family payroll. And now, after all that, he was the face of Kincaid Freight Systems. Years ago, over dinners I never wanted to attend, I listened as he told anyone who'd listen that one day he'd run the company. No one corrected him, not even Dad, not even once. I'd sit in silence, eating my food, holding back what I knew. That ownership had already shifted, that the paperwork he'd never seen told a very different story. And I let it be. I thought silence would be kindness. Maybe it was just fear of what would come next. As I neared the glass doors, a voice pulled me sideways. "Sir?" I turned. Evan, one of our junior logistics analysts, stood near the edge of the seating area, nervously clutching a tablet. "They've been saying you were stepping down anyway," he said, voice low. I blinked. "Who told you that?" He looked over his shoulder, then leaned in closer. "Dorian, last week, he said you were burned out, that the company needed, younger blood, that you were ready to move on." The spin had started before the fall. I nodded once, more for myself than for him. "Thank you, Evan." He opened his mouth like he wanted to say more, then just nodded and stepped back. The doors opened automatically, and I stepped out into the morning heat. Houston's sun, already unforgiving, bounced off the concrete like steam. I crossed the sidewalk toward the parking structure, the echo of Evan's words circling in my head. They'd been saying I was stepping down. The narrative had been written before I ever walked into my own office. Not an accident. Not miscommunication. A lie designed to soften the blow, to cover Dorian's tracks, make it look mutual, make me look tired, finished. The parking garage was mostly quiet, just a few early risers arriving late. I walked past the first row of cars toward the far end where I always parked. The spot next to mine was filled, but not with just any car. My father's Cadillac. Classic. Black. Polished chrome. The kind of car you only drive when you want people to notice. He never came in this early, so he knew. He knew what Dorian planned. Maybe not the method, but certainly the outcome. That explained the silence. That explained the sudden trip last week, the missed calls, the vague messages. Disappointment cracked something in my chest. Not rage, just a hollow kind of grief. For a man I had once tried to prove myself to. For a family that had always asked me to give more than I got in return. At my truck, I stopped. I didn't get in right away. I stood still, hand on the door handle, staring at the reflection of my own face in the glass. Older, sure, a few lines deeper, a few hairs gone, but not done, not finished, and definitely not stepping down. There were signs. Of course there were. I'd noticed the lunches Dorian had with board members without me. I'd seen the quiet hiring of new PR teams, the shifts in tone. I just didn't want to believe it. I gave them every excuse in the book. He's young. He'll grow out of it. He's just trying to impress. Dad, loyalty can make you blind if you let it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the hazelwood handkerchief. My mother's. still folded, still with me. I clenched it, took a breath, and looked toward the company tower behind me. Let's see how they react when they learn who the real majority shareholder is. They're about to walk into the most important board meeting of their lives. That thought settled in as I sat behind the wheel, the echo of my own words still hanging in the cabin. I put the truck in drive and eased out of the parking space, the company tower shrinking behind me with every turn of the concrete ramp. The building looked smaller in the rearview mirror than it ever had, and strangely, that steadied me. Not calm, just centered in a way that feels like tying down a load before a long haul. You do it without thinking. It's muscle memory. Once I reached the street, the morning traffic had thickened. Delivery vans cut in and out of lanes, commuters tapped their brakes in rhythm, and the skyline blurred as I merged into the flow. Houston has a way of moving around you even when your mind is stuck on one thing. As I drove, familiar landmarks passed by the windows. On my right, the warehouse district. I still remembered the day we opened those doors. I stayed there until midnight organizing shipments while my brothers left early for a gala. A little farther down, the service station where my mother used to stop for her morning coffee. Then the rail yard, now a freight hub, that I spent 2 summers redesigning myself because contractors kept cutting corners. Those memories rose without permission. Not painful, exactly, but heavy. Every stretch of road felt connected to some piece of my life's work, and now someone who had barely contributed to a single mile of it wanted to modernize everything. That was the word he liked to toss around. Modernize. People who don't understand the backbone of a company always love that word. A soft vibration from my pocket pulled my focus back. A text from Melissa. Then another. Then a missed call from the head of operations. The screen lit up again. My father this time. Then Spencer, the CFO. I let them ring. Not because I was angry. Not because I wanted to punish anyone. But because answering now would shift the tone. They'd hear urgency in my voice and decide that meant I was rattled. I wanted them unsettled. I needed them unsure of what I was preparing. Silence can be louder than any argument. Then my phone buzzed once more. A voicemail from Spencer. I waited until traffic slowed before listening. His voice cracked halfway through. Kincaid, something's wrong. Dorian tried to replace your name on the financial documents. We stopped him, but you need to get here. I replayed it. Twice. Just to make sure I hadn't imagined the tremor in his voice. Replacing my name on financial documents wasn't a rookie mistake. That wasn't youthful arrogance. That was intention. That was a map of someone's plan. And the timeline meant it wasn't a decision he made this morning. He'd prepared this. Maybe for weeks. Maybe longer. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and kept driving until the highway exit for Katie appeared. Instead of heading downtown toward the boardroom, I took the turn without thinking. The road widened, trees lining the edges, houses popping up in familiar clusters. Before long, I pulled into the driveway of the home where I grew up. The lawn was trimmed, the shutters still painted the same soft green my mother loved. The house hadn't changed much since the day she left us. I idled there with the engine running, staring at the front steps. This place wasn't part of any company portfolio. There were no board meetings, no spreadsheets, no strategic memos here, just memories, foundations laid long before there was a business to protect. A memory tugged forward, sharp and clear. I was 23. My mother was in her last week. We were sitting in her bedroom, light from the window falling across the quilt her mother had made. She handed me the hazelwood-colored handkerchief. the same one in my pocket now, and said quietly, "Don't fight to be heard. Fight to be undeniable." People talk about turning points like they're dramatic moments with string music underneath. They aren't. They're quiet. They're spoken in thin, fragile breaths that stay with you long after the speaker is gone. That was the day I decided titles didn't matter. CEO, COO, president, empty seats. I took equity instead. I built what I built because I wanted to do the work, not because I wanted my name engraved on some wall. I thought that would be enough to show who I was. But sometimes doing things the honorable way makes others believe you're not willing to fight. The engine hummed softly as I sat there. My phone screen glowed with missed calls, but I ignored them again. Not to be stubborn, to be clear. Clarity matters more than speed. The house windows reflected the morning light, and I saw myself, older than I remembered, but still the same kid who grew up here. The same kid who carried boxes for his father in the summer heat. The same man who never asked for anything more than fairness. A truth settled in. I could have taken the CEO position years ago. I could have claimed authority with very little resistance, but I didn't. Because leadership wasn't about the title. It was about stewardship. It was about carrying something worth protecting and keeping it upright. I mistook patience for virtue. They mistook patience for weakness. That realization cut deeper than any firing ever could. I turned off the engine. The sudden quiet wrapped around me. I placed both hands on the steering wheel and let the steadiness rise again. Today wasn't about punishing anyone. It wasn't even about reclaiming a role. It was about restoring order to something built with honest hands. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the handkerchief. The fabric had softened with time, but the color remained. Hazelwood, my mother's favorite shade. It reminded me that dignity survives even when people try to bury it. I pushed open the truck door and stepped out onto the driveway, the air warm and familiar. It's time. They learned exactly who they tried to erase. The air was heavier now. Maybe it was Houston's late morning humidity, or maybe it was something else, something thick in my chest. I didn't check the time. I didn't need to. The clock didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was what came next. And the first person who was going to face me was my father. I backed the truck out of the driveway with a deliberate calm and turned toward the inner loop, navigating familiar turns as the suburban streets gave way to downtown's sharper edges. My father's condo wasn't far, 10 minutes if traffic cooperated. It sat on the 8th floor of a mid-rise near Buffalo Bayou, glass and steel looking out over water and walking trails. Too clean, too curated, just like the man who lived there. By the time I reached the building, I'd already rehearsed the conversation in my head. But what I didn't prepare for was how fast the door opened after I knocked. No delay, no second knock needed. He was expecting me. He didn't greet me, just stepped back, eyes flickering like he was trying to find the right emotion and failing. "Kincaid," he started, voice rough around the edges. "We need to talk." I stepped inside. He was already dressed in business slacks, a pale blue shirt, barefoot, pacing. He ran one hand through his graying hair and exhaled hard but didn't meet my eyes. I closed the door behind me and waited. "You know," he said after a long pause, "I didn't know Dorian planned to—" "Fire me?" I said, finishing for him. He flinched. "Exactly. But you knew he wanted power," I continued, my voice steady. "You knew he's been circling the position like a buzzard for years. You just didn't care enough to stop it." He turned away, rubbing his hands together as if trying to warm them, though the condo was already too warm. He's my son. I'm your son, too. That stopped him. He turned, finally met my gaze. It's not like that. It's exactly like that, I replied, each word clean and cut with restraint. You wanted to give him something he could hold on to, a piece of the empire he never built. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Then he dropped the line that would stay with me for a long time. I thought he needed a win. I froze. A win. That's all my removal was to him. A consolation prize for the son he neglected most of his life. He had handed Dorian my career, my legacy, like it was a trophy to even out a scoreboard. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. A win, I repeated, quieter now. You gave him a win by tearing down the one person who carried this company through 3 recessions, 2 mergers, and your absence. He sat down heavily on the edge of his leather couch, eyes suddenly tired. I didn't think he'd go this far. That's because you've never looked at him the way you've looked at me, I said. You've seen me as capable, stable, reliable, and you've used that to ignore me. You gave him the benefit of every doubt, and me the weight of every responsibility. His head lowered, hands clasped between his knees. The silence between us was thick, years of it. Then he said something I didn't expect. Dorian told the board that you were planning to retire. My pulse thudded in my ears. What? He nodded slowly. He told them you were struggling since your mother passed, that you weren't emotionally ready to keep leading. Said you asked for space, time. I stared at him, waiting for the part where he'd say, but I corrected him. It never came. You let them believe that? I asked, flat and cold. I didn't know how to undo it without making things worse. You didn't know how to confront your own son, so instead, you let him bury mine. His face twitched, guilt rising like steam. But guilt's no substitute for backbone. My phone buzzed. I pulled it from my pocket. A text from Spencer. We need you here. Dorian is rewriting the org structure. He claims he's acting on your father's authority. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I turned the screen toward my father and watched the color drain from his face. I didn't authorize anything, he said, barely above a whisper. You let him in. You gave him the keys. You watched him replace me while I was still sitting at the table. His hands opened helplessly. I know what you thought, I cut in. But I'm done trying to understand your thoughts. I'm not here for your support. I reached into my pocket, felt the soft edge of the hazelwood handkerchief. My mother's words echoed louder now. Don't fight to be heard. Fight to be undeniable. I folded the handkerchief gently between my fingers before tucking it back in place. I'm here to tell you, I said slowly. You've lost control, and I'm taking it back for the company, for the people who still believe in what we built. He didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. As I turned toward the door, I glanced back at him once, just once, and said, next time you see me, it'll be in the boardroom, and everything will change. As I stepped out of my father's condo and let the door shut behind me, something shifted inside, a weight rearranging itself, not lighter, just clearer. The sky was dimming, that dull gray blue of early evening just before the streetlights blinked to life. I didn't drive back to the office. I didn't even head home right away. Instead, I followed muscle memory towards St. Augustine, where Patterson Holdings kept their southern division. I told myself I needed a breather, just a check-in, nothing official. The executive lounge was quiet when I arrived. Polished floors, framed leadership photos lining the corridor, some with my face in them, though fewer than you'd expect. The receptionist greeted me with that thin corporate smile, the kind that's more muscle memory than meaning. She didn't offer me the meeting list, just pointed at the lounge door. Odd. I pushed through the door and instantly knew something was off. My name was missing from the meeting board. Where it once read Kincaid Strategy Oversight, there was now a blank space. My chair, the one I'd always used during briefings, was occupied by Landon, calm, smug, leaning back like he'd always been there. Worse still, someone had neatly stacked my documents into a cardboard box and slid it under the long conference table like it belonged there. I blinked. No one looked up. No one said a word. I stood there for a full 30 seconds, waiting to see if anyone would acknowledge what was happening. They didn't. The feeling hit in waves. Disorientation first, then confusion, then that quiet kind of shame that starts in your gut and creeps upward. I didn't sit. I didn't speak. I turned and left the lounge with the kind of slow, measured steps that tell people not to follow. I needed air. But I didn't get far. The adjacent lounge, where the team sometimes gathered for drinks or unrecorded conversations, was already humming with a low crowd. I stepped in out of habit, not hunger. That's when I heard it. Landon's voice, louder than necessary, bouncing off polished surfaces. We've started restructuring. Time to trim the dead weight. Polite laughter trickled through the room. And let's be honest, he continued, some folks only got their seats because Dad paved the road for them. Doesn't mean they know how to drive. He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. Every glance in that room found its way to me, like magnets pulled to a truth no one wanted to say out loud. Someone near the window whispered, "Is he transitioning out?" Another asked, "So who's replacing him?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. My throat wouldn't cooperate. I stood still, hands in my pockets, jaw clenched, heart thudding like a slow, dull drum. I left before I could hear more. Outside the lounge, the hallway felt colder. I sat down on a bench near the elevator, stared at the wall, and tried to breathe. Why do I keep doing this to myself? I thought. Why do I keep protecting people who don't hesitate to tear me down the moment I blink? Why do I keep choosing silence when what I feel is fire? A memory surfaced. I must have been 6, maybe 7. My mother had knelt beside me after I came home from school with a busted lip and said, "You're the quiet one, the one who can take it." Back then, it felt like a badge of honor. Today, it felt like a sentence. My phone buzzed, an email. I opened it without thinking. Subject line, follow-up, succession notes. I recognized the sender, Landon. I scrolled and stopped cold. There, clear as daylight, was a forwarded message to my father, except he'd accidentally copied me. He should have been phased out years ago. If you don't act, he's going to embarrass the family. We need to move now. He's emotionally unstable and stuck in legacy mode. I didn't breathe for a moment. I read it again, slower this time. Like if I read carefully enough, the words might rearrange themselves into something less cruel. They didn't. I stared at that screen until the edges blurred. Then I shut the phone, stood up, and walked. No direction, just movement. I ended up in the parking garage beneath the building, the faint echo of footsteps trailing behind me. Sliding into my truck, I gripped the wheel and didn't start the engine. Maybe they're right, I thought. Maybe I'm the fool clinging to a past that doesn't want me anymore. Maybe everything I've built has already moved on without me. Maybe I'm the last man on a battlefield everyone else already left. On the way out, I passed the marina near the water, where my father once promised, even if your name's not on every door, this company's yours in spirit. That memory used to fill me with pride. Tonight, it felt like a lie. Or worse, an insult. I didn't cry. I just stared ahead, gripping the steering wheel tighter with every mile. Then, right as I turned off the highway toward home, my phone buzzed again. A message from my sister. He's saying things about you again. Call me. I didn't call. I didn't reply. I didn't even unlock the screen. I just stared at that message until it disappeared into the black. I still didn't know if I was ready to confront anyone else, but somewhere deep inside me, quiet, flickering, something stirred. It wasn't rage, not yet, but it wanted the truth. I thought I had reached my limit that night, but the real breaking point was still waiting for me at home. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the streetlights had already kicked in. That yellow wash of light through the oak trees made everything look older, quieter, like the world was holding its breath. I killed the engine, sat still a moment longer, then stepped out. The house was dark, but as I walked up the path, I saw a faint glow in the kitchen window. I opened the front door and stopped cold. He was sitting at my kitchen table, my father, same seat he used to claim at family dinners, back when there were family dinners. He wasn't drinking, wasn't eating, just sitting, hands clasped, like he'd been waiting a while. He didn't stand when I entered, didn't smile either. He just said, "We need to talk about your future in the company." Something in me, bone deep, tensed. I set my keys on the counter, keeping my eyes on him. "You could have called." He exhaled through his nose. This needed to be in person. There was a long pause before he continued, and when he did, his words moved like cold syrup. "You've always been good-hearted," he said, not meeting my eyes. "But not everyone's meant to lead. Leadership takes edge. It takes vision. And sometimes stepping aside is the most dignified thing a man can do." I stood across from him, arms folded, jaw tight. The words were familiar, too familiar. He went on, each sentence echoing what I'd just read in Landon's email, word for word in some places. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he added, voice low, like he was counseling a child. Not the man who'd saved his business a dozen times over. Then he slid a folder across the table. I didn't touch it right away. I looked at him, then down at the papers. A transition agreement, it said. Polished, lawyer approved, signed by C3 Landon, requesting I voluntarily step down from all operational authority. For the sake of preserving family reputation, he wanted my signature. My hands stayed still. So did my face. "You actually brought this into my house?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "I know it doesn't look like anything." "It is exactly what it is." He flinched, just slightly. "I've given you everything," I said. "I took the hard jobs. I stayed when no one else would. I cleaned up after Landon more times than I can count, and you still let him run this lie straight through our name." Dad opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "For once, look at me." And he did. For the first time all night, he looked straight at me. That's when I saw it. Regret, sure, but not remorse. Just fear that his little cover-up was unraveling. "You've been emotional," he said. "Ever since your mother?" "No." My voice rose, steady but sharp. "You don't get to use her. Not now." His lips pressed into a thin line. The silence between us crackled. After a long pause, he stood. "I tried to do what's best for everyone," he said. By erasing me? He didn't answer. He grabbed the folder and left it on the table. I'll give you time to think, he said. But I didn't need it. He walked out the door without looking back. I didn't sit down. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself grabbing my jacket and keys again. Something in my gut pulled me away from the house, into the truck, and down the old service road toward the company's storage facility. The lights were motion-triggered, flickering on in rows as I entered. This place had always been a graveyard of records, old contracts, shipping logs, dusty memorabilia no one wanted to throw away, but no one wanted to face either. But tonight, something drew me toward the back. Unit C7, that's where I stopped. There it was, a small archival box marked in faded ink. Hazel, private. My mother's name. I'd never seen it before. The lock was old, flimsy. It gave way with 2 firm twists of the key I kept for general storage access. Inside, handwritten ledgers, old bonds, notes in her cursive, and documents, dated, signed, detailing private accounts, asset transfers, and custodial rights. All in my name. All non-existent, according to my father and Landon. I sat on the concrete floor, the box open in front of me, and read every word. There was no mistake. Mom had left instructions. Power of attorney. Ownership claims. She had planned for a future where I would hold a quiet, controlling share in several divisions, silent but secured. And somehow they had buried it all. For the first time, the grief I'd carried for years turned, sharpened. Not into rage, not yet, but into clarity. They didn't forget. They hid, on purpose. I took my phone out, hands steady now, and snapped photo after photo. Every page, every signature. When I closed the lid and stood, I didn't feel broken anymore, just focused. By the time I got back to my truck, I knew someone else had been watching me that night. I reached for the door handle, but before I could pull it open, a pair of headlights flared on behind me. High beams, no mistaking it. The kind of brightness meant to startle, not light a path. My body tensed, instinct kicking in before logic. The engine of the car behind me rumbled low as I slid into the driver's seat. I started my engine and pulled out slowly, eyes shifting between the road and the rearview mirror. The car followed. Close. Too close. I took a right onto the frontage road, then a sharp left into a side street that curved behind an abandoned strip mall. They stayed behind me. Every move I made, they mirrored. Not fast, not erratic, just steady. Intentional. I've seen this pattern before. Not from strangers, but from hired pressure. The kind of intimidation that comes dressed in quiet suits and blurred license plates. And I knew who had sent it. Landon never liked dirtying his own hands. He preferred to pull strings, set traps, and watch people fall in. But this was sloppy. This was fear. I turned again, heading toward a gas station I knew stayed bright and crowded at night. Pulled in fast, parked by the pumps, and got out, phone in hand. I raised it casually, pretending to take a few photos of the sky, then turned and aimed straight at the car behind me. Whoever was inside didn't wait. Tires squealed, engine surged, and the sedan peeled off down the road without hesitation. Cowards always run when you face them head on. I stood there for a second longer, watching taillights fade. Then I got back into my truck and took a breath that didn't quite reach my lungs. They wanted to scare me, shake me off balance, but all they really did was confirm I was getting too close to the truth. Back home, I didn't bother turning on the TV or pouring a drink. I went straight to my home office, turned on the overhead light, and started laying everything out. The desk disappeared beneath documents, copies of corporate filings, scanned copies of what I'd found in that storage box. I taped names to the wall, drew lines between dates, properties, shell companies, inheritance clauses. The kind of thing my father once told me only paranoid men do. Tonight, I understood why those men lived longer. The pattern was there, clear and brutal. My mother's shares funneled through obscure trust transfers. My name omitted in silent revisions. And at the center of it all, Landon, sitting in a position no one voted for him to have, wielding power built on lies and silence. I dug deeper, into filing cabinets, encrypted backups, even scanned paper records from our early operations. That's when I found it. A series of quiet transactions, 3 years old. Several high-value holdings, land, shipping routes, equity positions, all once part of my mother's estate, were transferred out of holding accounts and into new ones, all under Landon's name, all signed off by our father. My stomach sank, not because I didn't expect it, but because it had been so well hidden, so deeply buried under layers of trust. It wasn't a mistake. This wasn't about Landon rising up. It was about pushing me out, deliberately, quietly, with the help of the man who used to read me bedtime stories about loyalty and legacy. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of it all sink in. For a moment, there was only silence, no anger, no sadness, just clarity. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't emotional. I'd been lied to, systematically. I stared at the wall of facts, then at the empty spot beside my name, the space where trust used to live. And I made a decision. No more silence. No more playing the good son. They were about to learn what happened when the quiet one finally stood. I pulled an empty folder from the shelf, labeled it with a black marker, Board Meeting. I slipped the photos, the copies, the timeline inside, clicked the cover shut, and as I looked at it, I rehearsed what I would say tomorrow, to Landon, to the board, to every person who nodded along while they tried to erase me. I didn't sleep that night, because by dawn I knew exactly how to end this. And once the sun came up, the exhaustion didn't matter anymore. Purpose has a way of waking you faster than coffee ever could. I showered, dressed, and drove to the office without the radio on. The silence helped me settle into the state of mind I needed. Not angry, not shaky, just clear. By the time I pulled into the company lot, the morning air felt heavier than usual, like the day itself knew something was coming. Inside, the boardroom glass was fogged slightly from the air conditioning, silhouettes moving behind it. They were already gathered. Of course they were. Pressure makes people early. When I pushed the door open, every conversation stopped. Landon sat at the head of the table, arms spread across the armrests like he was posing for a magazine cover. Dad sat to his right, shoulders hunched, focus glued to his phone. He didn't look up. Not even for a second. I took my seat without asking. "Well," Landon said, pretending to be amused, "I wasn't sure you'd show, considering your role is under review and all." There it was, the first strike of the morning. Soft enough that he could deny the intent, sharp enough to set the tone he wanted. A few board members exchanged glances, unsure whether they should nod or keep quiet. He kept going. "I think it's time we considered a clean transition, new blood, fresh direction, someone who understands the modern market." His voice carried that polished arrogance he wore like cologne, the kind that made people hesitate before challenging him. But today wasn't about hesitation. I placed the folder on the table, the one I'd prepared last night, the one that held the truth. "Before anyone discusses transitions," I said, You should see this. I opened it and slid the documents toward the center, slow enough that every eye in the room followed. Photos of the estate papers, the hidden transfers, the signatures Dad never disclosed, the forged correspondence from Landon, the copies from the archival box. The room went still. Not quiet, still, like the air locked itself in place. Landon froze, his practiced smile slipping just enough to reveal the crack underneath. Dad finally looked at me, and the guilt in his eyes landed like a punch to the chest. "This is a misunderstanding," Dad murmured, reaching for a page but stopping midway. His fingers trembled. "I did what I thought was best for the company. You were trying to bury me," I said, not loud, just honest. "And you didn't expect me to find the evidence." The board members shifted uncomfortably. The oldest among them, Mr. Harrow, cleared his throat. "Is this accurate?" he asked Dad. "These transfers? These sign-offs?" Dad's voice cracked. I can explain." But he couldn't. Everyone knew it. Questions fired from around the table, sharp, overlapping, relentless. Why wasn't this disclosed? Who authorized these changes? Why is Landon tied to personal holdings belonging to his mother's estate? For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear behind Landon's eyes. But fear is a dangerous thing. It makes some men collapse. It makes others strike back. He chose the second. Without warning, he stood and slapped a remote onto the table. A screen behind him lit up, showing a video, one of me sitting in my office months ago. The audio cut in mid-sentence. "I don't care about the company or this family." A few board members gasped. Others looked down. "That," Landon said, voice raised, "is the man you're trusting? He's been planning to walk away for months, and now he's trying to burn everything down on his way out." The room erupted. Questions, accusations, disbelief swirling like a sudden storm. I didn't move, didn't raise my voice. I waited until the noise reached its peak. "Play the full recording," I said. Landon stiffened. "This is the full recording." "No," I replied. "This is your version." I reached into my folder and pulled out a USB drive. "This is the original." The boardroom assistant plugged it in. The full clip began, and there it was, plain, uncut. Landon's voice first, mocking my mother, calling me weak, taunting me to react, bragging that Dad would always choose him, saying I needed to be pushed out of the way. Then my voice, calm, measured, the part he had sliced out. "I don't care about the noise or the drama. I care about the work and the workers and the promises we made years ago." The room went silent again, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was clarity. Landon's face drained of color. Dad shut his eyes like he couldn't bear to watch. The board didn't shout now. They exchanged looks that said everything. The tide had turned. "We need a private vote," Mr. Harrow announced. Chairs scraped back. Papers shuffled. The room shifted into preparation mode. Landon glared at me with something deeper than anger, something primal, cold, desperate. Then he stood abruptly and slipped out the door before anyone could stop him. And I knew exactly what that meant. As the board began voting, C3 slipped out of the room, and I knew he was about to make his most desperate move yet. I didn't hesitate. I stepped into the hallway and found him already pressed against the far wall, speaking into his phone in a strained whisper. His back stiffened when he realized I was there, but he didn't hang up. "I don't care what the board says," he muttered to whoever was on the other end. "You pull your investment now. Let them choke on the fallout." His eyes met mine. No apology. No fear of being caught in the act. Just fury. So that's the plan, I said. Burn the house down if you can't live in it? He lowered the phone slowly, jaw tight. You don't get it. You never did. His voice shook, not with nerves, but with something older, deeper. Dad spent our entire childhood pretending you were made of glass. Everyone else had to earn their place. You just breathed. I stepped closer, not with anger, but something closer to grief. You think he favored me? He took everything Mom left for me and handed it to you like a consolation prize. I spent decades trying to hold this family together while you tried to tear it apart. He swallowed hard. I only took what I had to take to be seen. Truth has a strange weight when it lands right between two people who spent years avoiding it. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then he pushed off the wall and stormed back toward the boardroom, still clutching his phone. I followed, not to stop him, there was no stopping him, but because I wanted to see the moment he realized he was too late. He shoved the door open and announced, "This vote is invalid. I have new—" "It's done," Mr. Harrow said calmly. "The decision is unanimous." Some board members didn't even look at him. A few watched with quiet disappointment. Dad kept his gaze on the table, hands clasped tightly, as if he were afraid they'd betray him again if he let them move. Landon stood frozen in the doorway, processing the blow. "You can't do this." "You did it to yourself," one member replied. "Misuse of funds, manipulated records, coercive behavior. There's nothing left to evaluate." Dad finally looked up. His face had aged a decade since yesterday. He didn't defend his son. He didn't defend himself. "I accept the board's decision," he whispered. The room fell into a heavy silence. A part of me wanted to feel triumphant, but all I felt was relief mixed with something hollow, like a bone that finally set after years of healing wrong. When the meeting adjourned, I walked out with the paperwork in hand. Landon stayed behind with security, arguing in circles. Dad followed me into the hall. "Kincaid," he said quietly, "I never wanted it to come to this." I turned to him. The man standing there wasn't the father I'd tried to earn love from. He was just a man who made choices he didn't have the strength to undo. "I need time," I said. "Maybe a lot of it." He nodded once, accepting it without bargaining. "I understand." We parted without shaking hands. By the time I reached the parking lot, the Florida sun was high, warm enough to feel through my shirt. But the warmth didn't touch the cold that had settled inside me. The cold of realizing a chapter of my life had closed for good. That night, at home, I opened Mom's storage box again. I thought I had seen every paper, every folded note, every receipt from a life she didn't have long enough to finish. But while checking the bottom seam, I noticed a small slit in the lining. Inside was an envelope with my name written in her handwriting, steady, graceful, unmistakably hers. My chest tightened as I opened it. "I hope you remember that strength is not in shouting," she wrote. "It is in knowing when to stop shrinking." I read the line twice, then a third time, letting her voice settle into the places that still felt bruised. It was the anchor I didn't know I'd needed, one final guidepost from the person who had always seen me clearly. A week later, I returned to the company, not as a wounded son trying to earn a seat at the table, but as the rightful majority owner with a clear purpose. I moved through the building with a different stride, greeting employees who had watched the storm unfold with uncertainty in their eyes. I reassured them, not with speeches, but with direction and presence. We had rebuilding to do. and I wasn't going to let fear dictate any part of that process. On the drive home that evening, I passed the marina where Dad once promised the company would be mine in spirit. That memory didn't sting anymore. It felt distant, like an old photograph you can finally look at without flinching. I realized I didn't need him to see me. I saw myself, and that was enough. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I was the one who finally stood up and walked forward without looking back.